No, I have two nephews already, so I'm excited. It always makes me excited for potentially having my own children. I mean, my clock is starting to run down. I'm in my mid 30s, so I
All
don't
right.
have like all the time in the world left,
Uh-huh.
but
But you do want
oh,
kids.
yeah, that is part of the goal is to get there at some point. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
whenever I'm full of anxiety about what pregnancy will be like or what having kids will be like, I see my
yeah,
nephews and I don't know, like it all just seems all of that potential stuff that could go wrong seems worth it because I
yeah,
look at their cute little faces and I'm like,
yeah.
ah,
Babies.
yeah.
Cool, cool. That's exciting. Well, I guess this is a good time to start. So I'll start. Yeah. Um, okay, so this is about social media, of course, and your experience with it and talking about a lot of elements, hopefully. I mean, there's no kind of trick questions, I want to say. There's one maybe, but I don't know if it really is. But the first question then was, what is your experience of social media? Just to start from the beginning.
So I have a long sort of winding journey with social media. I was uh, born in 1989, so
Mm.
I have been around for the whole growth of social media as a whole. I think the first thing I ever really did was use a Facebook account and a MySpace account back in the day.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't until 2017 that I actually started trying to like, use social media to grow an audience. Before then,
Mm.
it was just primarily the thing that everyone uses it for, like looking up stuff, connecting with family, whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and in 2017, I started an account to primarily showcase my sewing work because I'm a seamstress. I make clothes or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
I say or whatever because I get a lot of people commissioning me to do jobs
Whatever.
that are, yeah, like I've
Yeah.
I've made bed sheets for triangular shaped beds before, just really whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I just was originally thinking, oh, social media is great for networking and free advertising. I can post pictures of what I have made and
Was that to expand
over
the sort of seamstress business?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it was kind of as a way to have a portfolio and just
Mm.
let people know what I did. I thought it was a little bit easier, like if somebody wanted to see my work instead of having, I'm not a web designer. I
Hmm.
thought it would be easier to just direct people to an Instagram page where I
Hmm.
could say, hey, look, this is a feed of all the stuff I've made. You can look at it.
Mm.
Um, that would be a little bit easier than trying to put together a really fancy portfolio. I do have
Mm.
one of those also, but
Sure. Sure.
I think for a lot of people, social media is just a little bit easier. So that was
Mm.
where I started.
Hmm.
And at the same time that I was getting that page off the ground, I was in therapy, dialectical behavior therapy treatment for borderline personality disorder.
Hmm.
And I honestly could not tell you what the specific moment was, but at some point I decided I wanted to start talking more about mental health stuff. So
Hmm.
I would post pictures of like what I was making, but then in the caption, I started writing about mental health. And over the course of a couple of years, that began to shift more and more and more and more into mental health until eventually I split my page
Mm.
into I split off a second one to start putting all of my clothes on and all my
Hmm.
seamstress work and keep that separate from my work in mental health.
Hmm.
And in 2022, I launched another page to start promoting my next big project, which was the BPD Bunch, which is
Hmm.
a video podcast featuring a panel of people who are all in what I call functional recovery from borderline
Hmm.
personality disorder.
Hmm.
And so we use our Instagram primarily to promote episodes of the show, but we also use it to just post other relatable mental health content.
Mm,
So that's kind of generally been the what of like what I have done in the
mm,
social media space.
I
And
get it. And somewhat of the
yeah,
why, like you said about the kind of reason was like free advertising and access.
yeah.
Um, this isn't like the second question, but you saying about the access, like it being easier for people to access. Like, what do you think that's about? What why is that, do you think?
Well, I think it's because, I mean, part of it is most websites, you may have like a short web address, but there's something about like just looking up someone's handle
Mm,
on like Instagram that at least for me is easier than trying to find a website and making sure I'm on the specific page. I
mm,
think
the whole SEO stuff.
yeah, I mean, well, it's just also like if you get one letter wrong in your web address, you won't go anywhere. But if you're searching on Instagram for someone in
Mm,
particular, like
mm,
as you're typing, a list will come up of
yeah,
potential matches. And if
yeah,
it's close enough, then sometimes
you'll catch it.
you'll catch it.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. It's just like,
I just also thought from like because every website is laid out differently,
yeah,
right? I guess I just kind of figured that users of Instagram already know how Instagram is laid out.
yeah. Yeah. So you're kind of like capitalizing on someone else having figured out what is ergonomic to a display to a user,
Yeah, yeah,
and rather than trying to figure that out yourself in a website and then promote the website so that it gets enough traction or tr to even be visible to an audience. Okay, I get you.
yeah.
When you said you split off the seamstress from the mental health, did you like truly separate the two like completely at that point? Was the sewing profile no longer at all about mental health, or did you still have the taglines or the captions, that sort of thing?
No, I mean it's pretty separate now. I mean I think because my work in like, with the BPD bunch has really taken up so much of my time, I haven't had that much energy to devote to my sewing page,
Mm.
period.
Hmm.
Um, but I did split it off. I mean, I think there are some times where I may loosely reference other things. A lot of the people who follow me on that account also follow me on my other stuff. But
Mm.
yeah, I did mostly really separate it out. Like I think there's only a couple of posts where I really talk about mental health at all. And that
Yeah.
was just really just for the sake of keeping keeping those things more separate. Well, I think I realized that I was struggling to keep the attention of any particular audience when I had
Mm.
things so mixed.
Mm.
And that's not to say that you can't do that. Like I think there is this belief that if you want to reach people, you have to be super niche and niche down, niche down, niche down. Like that's what all of the
Mm.
like influencer gurus will say. And there is
Mm.
some truth to that. Um, but I just felt like the groups that I was trying to reach were, although they had some crossover, were different enough that it just didn't really make sense for me to keep those things together in that way
Yeah.
anymore. So they are related. So like my handle for my personal account where I talk about my own mental health or whatever's going on in my life is Xanabel, and then
Mm.
my sewing account is Xanabel.makes.
Right.
So
Okay.
like I do try to keep branding consistent throughout those two
Yeah.
accounts, but
Yeah.
they are completely separate.
Yeah. Like they have different messages and different purposes. I get you. You said that that was kind of like the not the how, but the what you've done. Like the question was, of course, like what is your experience? So how was it doing all of that? What was
Yeah,
the
so
experience?
it's really interesting, I think, to go from being somebody who is just kind of posting on social media for the sake of keeping up with family and friends, or like actually trying to turn it into something goal oriented, more
Hmm.
specifically goal oriented.
Yeah.
Because even though my personal and sewing accounts they've never grown as large as like my BPD Bunch account, which has like 26,000 followers, which isn't even that many in the grand scheme of things, but
Sure.
comparatively,
Yeah.
have never really grown that much. I think one of the odd things is when you start positioning yourself as not even just an authority in your field, but as somebody who is creating content, the
Hmm.
reaction from other people in that online space can shift.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm sure that this happens, if somebody posts something and it just happens to go viral,
Yeah.
but when you put yourself out there as a content creator, like
Hmm.
people's attitude towards you shifts a little bit and you become more like an idea of a person rather
Right.
than a person.
Yeah.
And like it got much, much, much worse after I started the BPD bunch, but I did, getting mean comments from people online was like being on the receiving end of that was a little bit
Mm.
of something that I wasn't really expecting. Um, I do
Sure.
think the culture of social media, especially in the United States, has changed a little bit over time, just in that.
What was it before?
Well, what I'm thinking of is like Facebook now, for example, kind of has this reputation of being a place where people kind of tear each other to pieces, even like
Right.
friends and family members.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was using Facebook, it was kind of one of those places where you like, I don't know, post really dramatic song lyrics and wait for someone to message you if you're okay. It's just like
Right.
not I just and it was also I think my age made that age of me using it made a
Yeah.
difference. But
Yeah.
um but yeah, I guess being on the receiving end of mean comments was definitely something that I had to get used to as a part of that whole
Yeah.
experience of being online, particularly when I started talking more about mental health. Like, I don't think I've ever had anybody say anything mean about my sewing stuff.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about a
Well-being.
diagnosis and
Yeah.
one that's something that other people have or have had experience with, people have an opinion on it and
Yeah.
they feel compelled to tell you all about it.
Right. It kind of like opens the gate for what seems like dialogue, but maybe isn't dialogue, because you're not having that
Yeah.
conversation with the audience in a direct way. You're just kind of opening the door for it, and then they're telling you what they would say if you could have that dialogue. But of course, in a culture that is not face to face talking with a human, right? Yeah. You said like
Yeah,
mean comments. Sorry.
oh yeah, I was gonna say some of the things I don't even know if they would say face to
Yeah,
face. I think
exactly. Yeah,
that's part of the whole thing.
yeah. Like there's that whole I mean, I think this is fairly kind of recognized now, like the anonymity. There's a word for this, like, but I can't think of what it is. But like the anonymity gives you free reign to just do whatever, because you can be tracked back, of course, like there's this whole process of like making sure that hate speech and this, violent sort of aggressive speech is being monitored more, I guess. But, it's still like the internet, right? You can put like a VPN on and boom, you're just as invisible as anyone else. Were you personally affected then by you said mean comments? I feel like that's kind of
Yeah, it's
maybe,
pretty vague. I mean, yeah, the short answer is yes.
yeah,
I mean, I don't, to some degree, I don't know how people are not at least somewhat affected by that stuff, at least at first, when
yeah,
you're not used to it, because as we've already established, like people don't usually say that kind of stuff face to face.
yeah,
So, when you get someone sliding into your DMs and saying that like you're a horrible person or
Mm.
that whatever they leave a comment that whatever you're struggling with isn't a real thing. It's just kind of
Right.
like,
Yeah.
um, it can be difficult to handle that.
Yeah.
And
Can I
I
can I
do
ask?
think that, go for it.
Sorry, can I ask like what is it about it that's hard to handle for you, or was hard to handle at the time? You know.
I think it's just, well, there's two aspects of this. I mean, well, probably more than two.
Sure.
Um,
Start with the two.
One is that I think just as a human being, when people kind of lash out at you or say unkind things,
Mm.
it, at least to me, it just kind of hurts because it's like, I don't know, like why would you say something like that on purpose?
Mm.
Like you took your fingers and typed this out. Like you didn't
Mm.
need to do that. What gave you the urge to do
Mm.
this?
Mm.
Um, but I think also I mean, it depends on the type of comment, but a lot of the times what makes something a mean comment or what feels mean about it is it activates like a personal insecurity.
Right. Yeah.
So, like if somebody says, "Oh, well, such and such disorder isn't real. That's not a
Yeah.
real thing."
Yeah.
That can feel uncomfortable, painful even because there's a part of me that has always doubted, like, am I just making this up? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? Right? So when
Mm.
somebody comments something like that, it hits on an
That nerve.
insecurity.
Yeah.
I think the comments that have hurt me the most,
Hmm.
that I felt the most hurt by, I guess, are you the ones that hit on some kind of
Mm.
insecurity or personal frustration.
Mm.
Um, and so in that way, I actually feel kind of grateful for
Mm. Why?
them because it helps me identify some of the things that I'm insecure about.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I used to when I first started the show, it was really hard. Like when I transitioned from just being me in this online space to being
Mm.
part of a greater cast and starting the BPD bunch,
Hmm.
I was surprised actually at how much the mean comments felt like they were more painful than they had been when it was just me in my little corner. I
Hmm.
think partially because it was, like this is I'm now kind of representing a larger group.
Mm.
And also, it was easier to just kind of, when I was just sort of talking about my experiences, it was one thing, but the BPD bunches, it's a whole production. I put a lot of time and energy into it. So it took
Yeah.
me about a year after starting that to really be more comfortable with the kinds of things that people would say, just generally about people who have borderline personality disorder. We don't often get like direct attacks.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that
Well,
was that was difficult.
on the sort of directly to the BPD bunch, like
Yeah,
social
like
media
it's
pages kind of thing.
very, yeah, well, so our we YouTube is interesting because it's kind of like in between entertainment and social media, right? Like
Yeah.
people go there to watch, but you can comment,
You
right?
can
There's lots
comment.
of
Yeah.
lots of comments on, and people on
Mm.
YouTube are, that's another interesting thing, the different
Yeah.
cultures of the commenters. Like I've generally
Yeah.
found on Instagram, we get a couple of angry people here and there, but for the most part, Instagram attracts the kind of people who really want to see what we have and
Hmm.
are excited to learn and grow.
Hmm.
YouTube is very much a mixed bag, and we get probably a mean comment a day
Yeah.
now. And
Is that where
yeah, so
success
that,
begins? One mean comment per day, and you're achieving. That's it. That's
well,
the
I mean a
that's
little
the
bit.
measure.
I will say that I've gotten to the point of thinking like, oh, we haven't gotten any mean comments in a while. We must not be doing very well.
Trending enough. Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and it's hard. It's sort of unfortunate that it is that way, but
It is. It
uh
is. But it makes sense, right? Like everything you do is going to attract, positive and negative response, right? So if the only response you're getting presumably is positive, it's your audience that's already captive, I guess, at this point
yeah.
that's seeing your stuff. And if you're getting shitty stuff, it's because you're catching some other people that don't necessarily, aren't already invested in your message or your content or your vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the things, like I was saying, because of like the gratitude, it's like it's kind of helped me work through some of those insecurities. And now, like when we get some of those mean comments,
Hmm.
I just kind of think they're funny
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's like, man, somebody, like we get essays sometimes, full on essays of somebody
Mm.
raving. And I just sit there going, man, you spent probably like 30 minutes of your time writing this out. Like
Yeah.
we had, we
Yeah.
had, we had a couple of like, hate watchers who would watch episodes and then leave hate comments. And
Right.
I actually thought that was great. I was like, hey, they're watching the
They're
show.
watching the show, right? All the way through. They're not skipping any ads by closing
Yeah,
the window.
they're watching it and leaving comments. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Traffic is traffic at that point, I guess, right? But still, it still
yeah,
leaves the mess, it still leaves the sourness of the mixed bag that is YouTube in this case.
yeah,
Yeah. There's I guess the second question kind of is relevant. I mean, we could talk about the first for a long time and stretch, that across the whole time we've got, but time is cracking on. So I'll move on to the second question because I think it fits this part of what we're talking about. And it's what was your hope versus what is the reality of social media?
Ooh, there's a lot of different aspects to this. I mean, I think, when you are aspiring to be a content creator, one
Hmm.
second.
That's fine.
Trying to stay hydrated, but
That's okay. We'll both take a moment for a drink, man.
so there's the part of social media, like from the content creation perspective, where you imagine you're going to put stuff out there and people are just going to love it and you're going to take off and things are going to be great.
Yeah.
And then there's the reality of trends change. People don't necessarily understand what you were trying to say.
Mm.
Um, our when I started the BPD Bunch account in 2022, it started taking off really fast at first.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of living with this expectation that it would just stay
Just
that
keep
way.
going. Yeah.
And, we hit a lot of times of things just being kind of dead.
Mm.
And I think just in terms of like trying to get your stuff seen and building an audience, I think the hard part is that like whatever your expectations are, it's like the reality just doesn't. It's hard to have expectations, period, because things are always changing.
Yeah.
Like even just like last month, we posted a video that is still getting lots and lots and lots of views. And the girl who worked on it with me, we're trying to rack our brains over what is it that made this video so popular because
You want to recreate it?
yeah, but we really can't figure out other because
Yeah.
we apply a lot of the same we apply a lot of the same sort of rules, editing
Hmm.
rules to
Hmm.
a lot of our content and we're like, "Oh, what is it? I don't know." And I think
Mm.
that's what's difficult is sometimes things some videos, some content just has something about it
Mm.
that makes it go and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I get you. It's the whole
So
problem of trying to, sorry, keep going. Sorry.
well, I was just gonna say, I was just gonna move on to the other types of expectations, but so you can respond to that.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna say it's like the whole problem of needing to understand something so that you can like learn from it and use it and then apply it again, and how kind of you frozen. I don't know if that means we're or if you're just really still. but how it's how like reality doesn't work
I
that
don't
way,
know
you
if
know?
that's me, but I will switch to my,
That's okay.
yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, it's like this idea that you can only learn from something that you can understand, right? Um, but reality isn't necessarily understandable, you know, like you were saying before. Um, it might just
What?
be
There we
fluke.
go. Okay.
Is it, are you back? I don't know if you heard what I was saying.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sorry, my
that's
internet
okay.
said it was unstable, so I switched to my phone.
All right. Okay. Well, that will hopefully hold out. But I was saying like there's the whole problem of like you can only recreate or learn from something that you can understand, and half the time things aren't like clearly understandable. They're either too complicated or kind of too um like thin, I guess. You know, there's not enough like that you know, it's like the iceberg metaphor, right? There's only a very small amount of it that is understandable, like truly, you know, and the rest is just kind of invisible to
Yeah.
us. Um, and it's frustrating when we come against that reality, you know, that you just can't do anything with it. It's just out of our control. And I guess that kind of leads me back into both the reality of social media that I think you're going to talk about, but also the experience, you know, like I imagine some part of it is exciting and difficult because it's out of our control. And I was curious about how you felt about that, like, you know, just how it's not really something you can grasp, something you can do anything about. You just got to keep trying to tread water and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely frustrating. And I think one of the things I personally struggle with is being too focused on metrics at any given point. And I
Right.
have, like, that's one of the things that I've had to learn how to mitigate. Like, because if you're trying to make a career in social media,
Mm,
though, various metrics matter because that is how you make money. That is how you push the things that you have to potentially sell.
mm,
Um, and so it's not like you can just say, oh, none of these metrics matter at all.
mm,
But on the flip side, if you focus on them too much, and this has happened to me several times where I start to feel kind of desperate,
right.
and I think people can feel that
Mm,
desperation and it gives them the ick.
mm,
And so then you end up inadvertently pushing people away from
hmm.
your content by coming across as too desperate for their attention.
Yeah. Try hard. Yeah.
So that's so finding ways to navigate some of those challenges, like when the algorithm changes or when trends and audience tastes change, all of that
Mm,
is difficult. And then I think, from the user perspective, as a user of social media, I think one of the you see some moments sometimes of what seems like this great community and great connectedness through social media. And I think it can be difficult sometimes to recreate that as often as we might like. Like I
hmm.
think sometimes at least I'll speak for myself. I think of social media as this great connection tool,
Hmm.
but I think the reality is that you're always dealing with the human element, and it can be challenging sometimes for that actually to play out the way that you imagine. It's hard to articulate that in a really concrete
Mm,
way.
I get you. Yeah.
But
Have you had
I guess like the best example
experiences?
I can give is that like when I was first starting out, like I made this one friend and we talked a lot. And
Like an
then one
online
day
friend?
she just, yeah, an online
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
And then one day she just disappeared.
Mm,
And I had a realization after that that like no matter how close some of these connections are, like I didn't have her address, I didn't really know where she lived, I didn't have any other way of looking her up, really.
Yeah, yeah.
So to this day, I have no idea what happened to her. If I said something or if something else happened, no idea because she just
Yeah.
disappeared and I could never find her.
Mm,
And I guess that just made me realize sort of the fickle nature of not all, but some of these social media connections where you can feel
mm,
really close to somebody, but
mm.
they can just
Switch.
ghost you
Yeah, yeah.
with without any warning, and you don't have any other connections to them. It's not like
You can't
if you
confront
were,
them. Yeah,
yeah, you can't confront them. There's no way to deal with that, and so I think that's another side to social media
yeah.
use that's interesting.
Yeah, I think you said the word community, which is sort of like triggers a part of me, right? Because part of the point of the podcast is not just to have interesting conversations. Of course it is, and that's the big part for me. But it's also this sense of wanting to have like a kind of digital community that people can jump in or out. It doesn't really matter, I'm not trying to catch anyone and hold them, but definitely I want there to be a sense of like culture, of like people coming in and buying into a culture that is uh engaging and respectful, right? And there's no way to police that truly, right? There's no way for me to be like, no, you're not allowed in here if you're not going to abide by these rules. It's like any human society, right? You can set rules, but that, of course, means that there's going to be people that don't meet them or don't want to meet them, you know? And that's what the mean comments are about, right? It's like you create the BPD bunch to spread awareness and to create kind of, I presume, a culture where you can de-shame this thing and you can talk about it openly and explore how it's kind of similar but different for each person who's experiencing it so that you can validate each other in your experience of what it means to be human with BPD or
Yeah,
recovering from BPD. And then people come in and just, like try to break everything that you're doing just because they can and you can't do anything about it, really, other than
yeah.
kind of, I guess, censor their comment or whatever. But even by doing that, you're creating a
Well, I
problem,
don't censor most comments actually. I leave most of them there.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of different reasons, but I don't have the time and energy to do this all the time, but one of the things I do like to do is answer, like try to find the kernel of truth in someone's mean comment and
Yeah.
respond from a place of kindness. I'm not always successful.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'm a human too. I've left my
Yeah.
my share of snappy responses occasionally,
Yeah.
or misinterpreted what someone was trying to say.
Yeah.
But I really I try to kill them with kindness, I guess. Like, I had somebody leave a comment about how you should just run away from people with BPD because they're not capable of being helped. And my response was, if you've had a bad, it's something to the effect of probably like, if you've had a bad experience, I'm really sorry. I do think it's important to clarify that, you don't have to help someone with BPD. It is a lot of work, and I recognize that. At
Hmm.
the same time, just because like you don't want to be the person doing the helping doesn't mean that we can't be helped.
Yeah.
And person just continued to flame out at me, and I just kept responding and politely and asking questions, and he eventually just gave up and ran away.
Yeah.
But I always think that, unless someone's being a troll just to be a troll, and there definitely are those, I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, especially in the context of the BPD bunch, a lot of the mean comments we get are from people who have had bad experiences
Yeah.
with someone with BPD, and it's kind of a defense mechanism for them to then just make generalizations about everyone who has the same diagnosis,
Mm.
which, I think that's a lot easier for people to do in the context of mental illness
Mm.
because kind of by definition these things are disorders. They are not.
Yeah.
generally full of what like society would call acceptable behavior, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's not like a difference of skin or eye color, but
Yeah.
that there is still a because we don't really have the language, especially in the context of personality disorders, we don't really have the language of what it means to be diagnosed with it. Meaning, like, when you say someone has BPD, you're not
Hmm.
specifying where they are in their recovery journey. Like, are they
Mm.
self aware? Do they know anything about their behavior? Like, which five or more of the nine criteria do they actually have?
Yeah.
And all of that nuance really makes a difference when you're talking about, this
Yeah.
whole group of people.
Yeah.
And I think people don't necessarily think about that. They don't realize that when they make these generalizations, even though it is different, it's not that different from making generalizations about people based on sex or race or
Whatever.
whatever else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They're still making generalizations that
Mm. Yeah.
are not going to be
I
true for
came up with
everyone.
this like thing a while ago, but it's kind of like any ism, like racism or sexism, or in this case, I don't know what the ism would be for BP against BPD people,
It's a
but
prejudice, yeah.
prejudice, right? Any prejudice is kind of based on like a single example and generalized to the group, right? And I think it's a really important point that you're making by saying that because it is, I think, the common thread of any prejudice. You've had one experience, or you've heard of one experience, and that's it. That qualifies the group now. And then it becomes cultural, where people just agree with this concept. And then there's, of course, all the vicious nature of that playing out, in human society. You made a point earlier about like the defense mechanism of hate, and it made me want to say like how I can imagine some of that is also how it's kind of pushing away your own sense of failure. It's like it's their fault, right? It's not me and how I didn't know how to manage or how to understand or how to empathize or how to remain patient, loving, whatever it might be, if it's about relationships like we're kind of suggesting here. Because it's harder to admit failure than it is to kind of slander and protect. Like, I think that's a really good point as well. Because it's all the whole, again, not to kind of push this point about this podcast, but respect is very hard if you're unwilling to look at yourself, right? Which is why I think it's quite cool that you try to read into the message that may have some like kernel of truth, not necessarily truth, but experience that's worth recognizing. Because otherwise, we're only ever
Yeah.
going to answer with the same thing that we're receiving. You're going to answer hate with hate and answer dismissal with dismissal. And I think it's important to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Self-reflection.
Well, it's always one of the things that surprises me is people seem to like deliberately miss the point or deliberately miss the nuance of
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
The whole premise of that show is really to be really honest and open about some of the problematic things that we have done and how
mm,
we got to a place where we don't do those things anymore.
yeah,
And like as an example, a recent comment that I got was, well, so every episode has a similar format where in the first part we reminisce about some of these problematic and or unhealthy, ineffective behaviors.
sure,
In the second
yeah,
half, we talk about like what we've done.
yeah,
And we got a comment as an example. I was like, "This doesn't make me feel any sympathy for people with BPD," and I was kind of like, "That wasn't really the goal.
mm-hmm,
Like, the goal isn't to get your sympathy. The
mm-hmm,
goal is to unpack
mm,
these things so that we
mm,
can help people not act this way." But it just seemed odd to me, this like
mm,
deliberately missing the point of
yeah,
like it's
I
it's
get
not
you.
about that. And sometimes I just it's interesting because like a lot of these flame outs are
Mm,
people who are not doing any of that self-reflection, any
mm,
of that like digging into nuance or what have you, because the reality of relationships is that even when someone has a psychological disorder, it's not all on one or the other.
Hmm.
It does take two.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, regardless
and I
of
think people
any
struggle with
disorder,
that.
that's true, you know? Like any human relationship, you're gonna have all your shit get unpacked, consciously or not, with that other person. And, it's gonna play out one way or another. If you put disorders into the mix, it becomes maybe more, explosive in some ways and more obvious in some ways how that's playing out. But there's, just as many ways of it being silent, sort of a silent problem in a relationship as an explosive problem in a relationship, and how both can be
Yeah.
huge problems. Um, to just bring it back more like to the social media angle, I guess there's the point I think that we're making here is that if you open the gate of social media, like you said, kind of with a goal or with some content, I guess is the best word, you're inviting the whole of humanity in, right? The whole spectrum of what that can look like in. Um, and I think that's partially why I'm curious about social media and talking about it with you, is because you've done it with, I mean, talking about niches, it's not so niche, but still, like, seamstress kind of stuff and, or, sewing stuff and mental health. They're two particular kind of corners of what it means to be human and what it means to just be alive, right? And so you're going to
Yeah.
get those particular feedbacks out of those places. But at the same time, it doesn't really seem to matter. Everyone kind of has the same kind of response to social media. Like you get a lot of shit or some shit which feels big, right? Even if it's not the majority, it feels big. And the rest, I mean, I don't want to just talk about the negative, painful, mean stuff. I also am curious about all the positive, right? Like all the ways that there is community, that there is validation or help. And so I was curious about that for you. Like, yes, there's the shitty part of human nature that gets exposed in social media that you've had experience of. How about the other side of things?
Well, yeah, if there wasn't the other side, it wouldn't be worth it, right?
Right.
Like there
Yeah.
is, there is. You're right. I think that a lot of the negative experiences really stand out. And like I said, the first year, that was the stuff that I think really stood out to me. It was hard for
Yeah.
me to deal with.
Hmm.
But I have never met, probably anywhere in my life, in face-to-face interactions, I've probably never met people who really know what I experience than like the people I met online.
Mm.
I think that is one of the benefits to, perhaps the anonymity of it all, is that you post something sharing an experience of yours, and
Hmm.
people who in real life may not come up to you and be like, oh, I experienced this too. Online
Mm.
they can send you a DM, they can comment something and like, oh, I know
Mm.
exactly what you're talking about, right?
Mm.
And I think that is one of the things that I really appreciated. I mean, my whole career now wouldn't even have existed if it weren't for
Mm.
the relationships that I built back in the earlier days of building up my page. Because when I was doing sewing and mental health stuff, that was when I started to build relationships with people in the I guess we'll call it the online BPD community.
Mhm.
And it was through a lot of those conversations that I had with people that I realized that there was something to these peer conversations. That
Mm.
there is something, I, on the one hand, I don't want to make things like an echo chamber where the
Mm.
only people I surround myself with have BPD, because
Mhm.
I think it's important. to have connections with all different kinds of people. But
Yeah, diversity,
I
right?
think I think building a network of friends who all have BPD, it really made dealing with people in my regular everyday life who don't have it a lot easier. Because at that point, I didn't need like my
Mm,
immediate family to completely understand everything. It's not like they haven't tried. You know,
hmm.
it's just they're not me. They don't have this exact experience. Not that everyone has
I'm
the
just saying,
exact
I get you.
experience,
Yeah, yeah.
but you know, it was just
It's more relatable.
I didn't need to force my mom to completely understand this one moment because I have people who do get it.
Mm,
And that I
mm,
think had that secondary effect. And you know, it's always a double-edged sword. You know, it's so easy to post something on social media as if you are an authority on a subject, and people get canceled for this all the time, right? Where you realize, oh, wow, this person was just spouting nonsense to try to
hmm.
make money or get views or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I do feel a pretty heavy responsibility to try to make sure that I only put out like good, accurate things.
Hmm.
But man, like there are a lot of I think one of the other aspects of social media is that, you know, real research is slow because
Mm,
like if you're trying to get information on something, it takes time for an organization to get funded, for researchers to come up with their hypotheses and do all this stuff and do
yeah.
testing and anecdotes are not a replacement for
Hmm.
real research, but I do think that that is when you are online and you can communicate with a lot of different people who maybe share certain experiences to yours, you can get an understanding of yourself in a way that, you know, would be difficult to do
Mm, mm.
otherwise.
Yeah, it makes me think of something you said earlier. Like the people saying horrible shit made you identify your own triggers, let's say, or your own sensitivities, and how, we only really know ourselves by reflection, right? Like you cannot really know yourself if you're just alone in a bubble. You need reflection, you need mirroring. And what you're kind of saying, it made me think of like a cloud of mirrors, like you're surrounding yourself with many, many more connections and people that you can reflect off of in your ways that you are similar, but also how you're different. And that's far less difficult when there's thousands of people to choose from rather than 20 in your immediate family or your kind of the people from school or whatever that you manage to hold on to. It's just a far larger audience. But of course, like we said before, that brings its whole host of complications too, because you're not just getting the good mirrors, you're getting all the other ones too. Um, I'll move on to my third question. I guess we kind of talked about it a little, but yeah, what have you learned from your experience of social media, and what would you change if you could do it again?
What about, man, there's a lot of things that I've learned. I mean, I think one of the things I've learned is to not take myself so seriously.
Yeah, yeah,
Because like I was saying before, there are people who are going to kind of deliberately misinterpret you because they want to get their own viewpoint out there or because they want to start a fight or whatever.
sure.
You know, like I put out like a 1 minute skit and I'll get people criticizing, you know, that I didn't completely cover some other angle and it's like it's a 1 minute skit.
Yeah,
There's only so much you can put here.
yeah.
And that kind of stuff used to really hit me and I kind of am now more I think in some ways I'm more chill as a result of my experiences on social media because I'm
Mm,
you know you can't I think it's really taught me how little you can control other people
hmm.
and that therefore you don't need to take yourself so seriously all the
Mm,
time.
mm.
You know, you're
Yeah,
gonna make
because
mistakes and
yeah.
how you recover from those is more important than the fact that you make them.
Mm, yeah, I get you. Yeah. It's like the kind of concept like taking yourself seriously is the idea that everything you're doing matters, right? And will be forever matters, like it's never going to stop mattering. Whereas really everything we do matters very little, right? And it's being forgotten almost instantly by anyone who witnesses it, you know? And I guess your, process of week after week, month after month, trying to make stuff that is permanent but also is going to be lost to the kind of ether of the internet is and getting feedback that matters for a week, but then the next day you're getting a different piece of feedback from someone else, and that's now what matters. It all just kind of gets washed out and smoothed out, like it's like being sanded by this process. Of course, you
Yeah.
use that sanding process to like grow, but I'm sure that that's not the story of everyone who gets confronted with social media. But it's cool that you did. You said,
Yeah,
there's a lot of things you can learn. Sorry.
yeah, it's hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
to overcome that stuff. I guess I I think the reason so that was sort of a conscious choice.
Hmm.
I think there were two things that I realized about like the meanness of people. One was that if people are saying mean things about you, then they think you're doing well enough that they think you have something to tear down.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that was part of what motivated me to want to change how I interpreted like mean things.
Hmm.
But also, you know, I grew up with a mom who would often talk about like lessons in challenges. And when I was
Hmm.
really young, I found that super invalidating because we were not able to communicate well with each other.
Hmm.
And my mother is not someone who talks on and on and on and on and on. And I am. And so I really wanted like more of, I think I needed more of a description from her.
Hmm.
But she has such a positive outlook on life and dealing with people because she's always looking for the lesson to be learned from a difficult situation. Like, how can I use this to grow and not
Hmm.
let it break me down?
Hmm.
And I think as an adult, finally, like really seeing her and really seeing how well that has served her, I aspire to be more like that. And
Hmm.
so I just, anytime something was difficult and painful, I just started figuring out like, how can I learn from this situation? And actually, one of my
Yeah.
cousins was the one who posted at some point online something about how, like, mean comments activate our own insecurities. And I was thinking, huh,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
I don't think I have very many original thoughts. I'm an amalgamation of all the things I've learned from other people.
We all
But
are.
I seem to have gotten a good group of thoughts together that have served me pretty well so far.
Mm. Yeah. And have you've needed to like be exposed to, it's kind of like getting like catching what you need in that moment. You started social media and then as you're doing this, you attached yourself to the things that you needed to be able to survive it. I think that's one of the I mean, it's a very animal thing, right? To like take what will help you adapt to your situation. Except that we can choose our
And
environment, I guess.
and that was hard because I definitely was not always like this. I spent a lot of my teens and 20s in particular kind of just making worst possible decisions for myself on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Sort of the banging my head against the wall and expecting something totally magical
Different.
to happen. And
Yeah.
eventually it just had to realize that that was not going to work.
Yeah. Is that something that you then, what changed at that point for you?
I think I got tired of, I just got really sick of myself, I think, being that
Mm.
way and being so miserable. And there's a couple of moments. I think one was realizing that no matter how much I kick and scream and throw a fit, time is going to keep moving forwards.
Yeah.
Grow
Yeah.
up, I didn't want to be an adult. I kind of wanted to live in my magical fantasy land. And I started to realize that no matter how much change to my whims, I had to find a way to make it work
Yeah. I
for
get you.
me
Yeah.
rather than trying to work against it.
Yeah.
Pass away someday with nothing really amazing to, nothing to show for it, or
Mm.
I could do something with
Yeah.
myself. And I don't know how much I'm really making of myself, but I'm certainly trying. I want my life to mean something. I want all of the suffering that I experienced to be useful for something. And
Mm. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess that was what happened.
Yeah. I get you. There was sort of two thoughts. Like the first was like it's kind of synthesizing it. Maybe I hope this is okay. Is like from the transition from childhood to adulthood. You know, it's like that moment when it's like the world is not going to change for me, you know, which is part of the developmental process of moving, of growing older, right? You know, you start your life and, you know, in an ideal family, I guess your parents are going to try and make the world different for you so that you will be able to grow safely and happily. And at some point, that illusion that the world is going to keep doing that has to break because, you know, the world is not your parents. It just doesn't care as much as your parents ideally do. And that's in cases where family does care, let alone where it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then you've got a whole different problem, right? That you've learned that the world is careless and hard. And then you've got to struggle with trying to get out of that problem too, so that you can learn actually that you can be safe and happy and thrive. You know, so either angle, you're gonna get fucked, right? Is what I'm trying to say. Like the world, one way or another, is gonna fuck you, and you've got to learn how to deal with that and how to learn from it, like you and I guess your mom is
Yeah,
saying.
it's funny that you mention all that because it's kind of, I think it's so interesting that I would say I came from a really loving, supportive background. My parents did a
Mm,
lot to try to get me help when I was struggling, and there are a lot of other members of my extended family who have similar experiences, but me and several of my cousins grew up to kind of be like, wow, the world is so horrible compared
mm,
to like childhood. And I think for
mm,
me, that was why it was really hard to want to accept being an adult
mm.
because I did not.
Yeah,
I just wanted to stay in my happy little family unit forever and just be 10 years old and
yeah,
we'll just do trips and family dinners and that's how things will be forever until the end of time. I don't want to have to make my own family. I don't want to have to
yeah,
go out and make my own decisions. Like,
yeah.
I don't want
And
to
be
do this.
responsible.
So,
Yeah, to
yeah.
bear the responsibility
Hmm.
of being in the world, right? You said kind of what you learned. I
Yep.
mean, parts of what you learned. I'm sure that's much more that could be said, but what would you change to sort of finish that question? Is there anything that you'd change?
About social media,
No, about what you did, about kind of not so much about social
about what
media,
I
because
did.
yeah, because I don't
What would
think,
I do differently?
yeah, what would you do different?
That is a good question. I mean, this is something that I think I'm still trying to do now because as part of my personality, I tend to be a little bit perfectionistic. And so I'm really trying to get myself to say this is good enough,
Mm,
because people often don't notice the difference between good enough
mm,
and perfect, and the
mm,
amount of time it takes me for something to be perfect just burns me right out.
mm,
And it used to be much worse. Like I was much worse about it. Like my original account still has probably like 50 drafts of videos that I started and never finished because I was like, I don't know, this isn't quite what I want it to be. And
mm.
then I just never posted it. And now some of those things are so old they just wouldn't be relevant anymore, which is why I haven't really gone back to put them up.
Mm.
But
You ever made a
I
B
think that's
tape, like a
that's
B-side
yeah, but
YouTube
that's one
channel?
of the things that I think I would do differently is to just post the thing. And there are a lot of things that I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should post this. I don't know, I don't know, and then I put it up and it's totally fine. And it's usually
Yeah.
the ones that I didn't think about that like where something goes sideways. So,
Mm.
it's just not worth it to spend so much time trying to make things perfect. And also, if things aren't, that's how you adjust. You just put stuff up there and adjust it until you
Yeah.
figure out what works. And that's always
Yeah.
going to be changing too. So that's what I wish I had done differently, is not worried so much and been such a perfectionist. Just put stuff out there and see what sticks.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, it's kind of like the good enough gets you going, and then it's about keeping momentum, not about getting everything right. Another good message, probably that your
Yeah.
mom gave you at some point. Just get going. Which is probably
Yes.
really annoying when you're
Yeah.
struggling with perfectionism, you know? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Cool, cool. I feel like we could talk more about that, but and we are going fairly quick. So I guess it's kind of a good thing that you took a minor break because I guess I don't know if this question is actually gonna be like real, but it's kind of the one that I think is more real. Um, it is. What are the differences between your sort of projected self or identity on social media and your kind of real self or identity on social media? Like if there are any, but I expect there are some. Could
Oh,
you?
that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think I would say I am a caricature of myself
On social media.
on social media. And what I mean by that is that it's not like anything is inauthentic, but sometimes it is played up so that
Hmm.
people really understand what it is that I'm getting at.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, whenever I'm recording, even just like right now,
Hmm.
I'm a lot more energetically on
Hmm.
than I am if I was just sitting here doing work or chatting with my husband in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So there's not a it's not a huge difference. It's just like as an example, and it's kind of a mean comment, but like people have said, "Oh, like the host is so like has so much energy, she's so draining." Like because
What?
she's got like too much going on. And I think that's interesting because it's like it's not that different from how I am just normally, but I do really fluctuate in terms of how much
Yeah.
energy I have, and I really give everything that I have when I am
On
recording or
mic.
making videos
Yeah.
for the show.
Hmm.
I do think that the biggest difference is just in terms of how I share my opinions. I
Hmm.
tend to be a little bit more direct and
Hmm.
aggressive in my daily life when I'm
Hmm.
sharing what I think about something.
Hmm.
Usually because in my daily life, I'm talking to people who know me and they know the
Hmm.
greater context of what I might be talking about.
Hmm.
Whereas when I'm on social media, I'm very cognizant of the fact that whatever I'm talking about, like that might be the first time anyone has heard me speak.
Hmm.
And so I think the people who know me in real life would say that I'm a lot more direct,
Hmm.
than how I show up online.
Yeah. It's like caution is the name of the game in some ways when being public, you know?
Yeah, I mean it's partially caution, but it's also just I think it's very easy for people to take things out of context and assume that they mean something that they
Hmm.
don't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really it's really just being I think yeah, it is cautious yeah, it's just not, I don't know. I guess I just think that's part of, it's not that different to how I would be in like mixed company versus at home with
Yeah,
my close, like if I'm in mixed company with a bunch of people I don't super know well, I'll
yeah, yeah,
probably be more similar to how I would be on the show,
yeah,
where I'm I'm trying to couch everything from this particular context or that context so that people don't think I'm trying to make some kind of commentary about how they live their lives, for example.
yeah. I get you. Yeah, yeah. It's like, you know, the mixed company, it's kind of is the idea of you are meeting these people for the first time. You need to understand where the boundaries are of, you know, how they will respond to what you're saying. And knowing, you know, your audience, right? You need to know your audience to know what you can and can't do. I think there's a whole point that's kind of in the background of this conversation that I kind of was floating right at the beginning. And it's like you, you know, with social media, you're trying to find out you're trying to exist in a group that you don't know, like you said earlier, you know, like you well just now, I guess you don't know these people, you don't know what they're gonna hear, what they're not gonna hear, because everyone's different, and what you say isn't necessarily what someone hears. But there's also the whole point of like who you are is not readable in a direct way with a video or 5 minutes of time that's especially in the case of the YouTube channel, I guess for you, which is edited, it's, you know, it's not a real person. It's a shape of someone that's trying to create what is human enough to be relatable, but not so human that it's boring or or cringe or, you know, whatever it is that we're trying to avoid so that the metrics stay up, you know. Um, and there's something about that in my mind that is kind of essential because, you know, like you're saying, I don't really watch much YouTube, but what I do watch, I want it to be engaging, you know, so they have to be doing something that's not typical, that's not what they would be doing if they were sitting in their kitchen with their husband, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to go out of my way to watch you sit in your kitchen with your husband. I mean, some people, I
Yeah.
guess, are really into that. You know, there are vlogs and all sorts of shit that is just people living their lives. But there's something about social media being two-way, you know, that changes everything because it's no longer you being, it's you being with an expectation of audience and of response in some ways, whether it's the response is comment or view, you know, either way is a response, right? You're getting some form of feedback from that. And your goal is to maximize feedback, you know, maximize response. And I think that's a part of something I wanted to talk about is is how you deal with this point, you know, that you're not able to be you because you're now you being viewed through a box, you know, that is your channel, that is your handle, that is your social identity, for lack of a better word, you know. I was curious about how you, I mean, I guess it leads on to the next question, which is how comfortable are you with social media and being in, like putting yourself in front of that filter?
I It's a mixed bag, I think, to be honest. I'm at least I try to be as comfortable as I can be in terms of people viewing me and seeing me as the person I am. And I will say that for a lot of the people who've met me in person after seeing the show or knowing me from the show, most people have said that I'm exactly who they thought I was. The usually the only thing is people are surprised that I'm not taller. People think that I'm only 5'4".
Right.
And people, so I don't know what that, I think that's like 100 is that 160? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
doesn't
trying to
matter.
figure out what that is in centimeters, but
Metrics, yeah.
uh,
That's fine. 5'4" for those who understand is good enough.
But yeah, I'm yeah, so that's usually people are like, "Wow, you're shorter than I thought you'd be."
Yeah,
Um, but
but still as energetic and
yeah, I
yeah.
think I actually sometimes hide too much of my like more direct personality
Mm,
that like my closer friends would know. I think I'm I definitely struggle with the fear that if I reveal more about I can't even think of a specific example, but it's just like
mm,
sometimes in any given moment it's hard to know how authentic people really want you to be.
yeah.
Because there is an element of like I'm trying to figure out how do I say because if you really put your completely raw, unfiltered self out there,
Mm,
very it's a type of vulnerability that is really difficult. Then the meanness is very challenging to overcome.
mm, mm,
And so like I have used real like in terms of like negative distress emotions. I have used real distress, negative emotions from real life situations
mhm.
that I was feeling in that moment to film skits about other things.
Right. Yeah.
So like, but I do try to draw a little bit of that line, partially because I think the fact that people sometimes react to skits as if they are real life is very problematic and scary.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that there are a lot of people who cannot tell the difference between a reenactment and an actual footage of
Mm,
something is a little bit scary
mm,
because I do think that like there is a difference and I try
mm,
to maintain a little bit of that difference so that there is a line between fantasy and reality
mm, mm.
because I actually think that line is important.
Yeah. Essential when it comes to anything that's content rather than life, right? Yeah. You didn't quite
Yeah, it's
answer how, sorry, sorry.
how I deal with it.
No, how comfortable you are.
How comfortable I am. I don't know. It's hard to say. It just depends. I think it changes depending on the day and
Yeah.
what I'm doing. I think it's I guess I would say it's dynamic. It's a dynamic process, and
Mm,
always working on being more and more and more comfortable being seen for who I authentically am.
mm,
Because I
yeah.
think that's even though there may be aspects of myself that I keep separated,
Hmm.
I do want what people see to be real.
Yeah.
Largely because I don't, especially because of like what I'm doing,
Hmm.
right? I am trying to help people who struggle with some of the same things that I have struggled with to
Mm,
find ways to move forwards. And if I'm not
mm,
really real with that,
mm,
then there's
mm.
no way that it would actually be effective, I
Yeah.
think.
I get you.
So
Yeah.
I struggle with it sometimes, but I think I'm getting more and more comfortable with it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that you start off with like, um, I mean, I imagine, I don't know if this is true, but I imagine that you start off with kind of an intent for what you want your social media experience and profile to be. And then as you get more and more kind of ground down by it and more accepting of it, you need to hide less and less from it because you're learning better ways of filtering out the noise and focusing in on what really does matter, which is kind of what you wanted to do from to begin with. You know, it's a fascinating thing, especially because I think for me, my expectation of any conversation about the internet or social media is always kind of gonna be like, it's shit. Everyone's horrible, apart from those who aren't, but really they're not like as impactful because negativity bias. Um, but for what you said earlier, for it to still be worthwhile, because you're still getting connection, you're still getting some form of impact, at least on the people who really who the content is really for, right? Because the content's not for trolls, it's for people who are struggling or recovering from BPD. In the case of the BPD bunch, you know, when it
Yeah.
comes to sewing, it's for people who care about sewing, right? Which
Yeah.
is the point
Well,
is to, yeah.
I mean, I think this all brings like an important thought in general is that whether you are a content creator or a consumer of media, I
Mm,
do think it's valuable for everyone at some point in time to ask themselves, like, what am I trying to get out of this?
yeah.
Because I think some of us get addicted to social media as an escape from life,
Hmm.
and then it's not really serving a productive purpose anymore, but we just keep using it because it
Mm.
feels good sort of in the moment.
Because it works.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean that was something that I had to think about when it came to listening to music because
Hmm.
like this is I think this is a little kind of funny. I didn't really start listening to like pump up breakup anthems until after I was married.
Right. Why?
Before, so basically what happened was like all my breakups before I married my husband, I would listen to like all the stuff that just makes you feel the feels, makes you feel worse. Like I can't live without this person. Like I'm
Hmm.
so sad. Like these
Hmm.
kinds of like there will never be another person like you sort of music.
Yeah.
And it just really compounds that emotional experience for me.
Mm.
You know, I do
Hmm.
think, anyone listening, you have to take this with a grain of salt because there are some, I'm one of those people who I don't mask very well. I sort of, if I feel it, it comes out.
Yeah.
And I think for people who tend to be a little bit more reserved, sometimes listening to that kind of stuff can help them to feel the things that they repress. But for
Yeah.
me, it just amplified those feelings so much more.
Yeah.
And so then at some point when I think it was actually after we were already married, I started having this appreciation for all these breakup jams, and I could finally let go of some of the past emotion that I'd been holding on to, just still from past relationships. And I thought,
Yeah.
man, what you listen to really makes a difference, and I think that's true on social
Mm.
media as well. And being
Mm.
aware of what it is that you're taking in, and being cautious not to only surround yourself with people who agree with you, but also you know
Mm.
not feeding the part
Mm.
of you that can get more dysfunctional from whatever
Yeah.
certain types of content, right?
I get you. You are what you eat, right? In a very
Yeah.
real way. Um, I think about that a lot, actually. I was talking with about sort of true crime, which is not something that I don't love it because I see it as feasting on misery, and I don't love that concept because you are what you eat, right? And I don't need to see the world as any more of a horrible and dangerous place than I already do, because I already understand that that is a part of the world, right? I don't need to kind of expand that into my
Yeah.
psyche, into my being. Um, yeah, I'm glad that that came up. Yeah. The final question, number six, is I kind of want it to be a staple question, but I'm not sure if it will be. But it's, what question would you like to be asked about social media? Which is a bit of a
It's
trick.
funny. That's a great question.
It is a good
I've used that as well before for
Have
other
you?
people, and it's what would I want to be asked about social media?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the question, but the first thing that comes to mind is like, is it possible to use it in a healthy way?
Mm,
Because I think
mm,
that's a big debate that a
yeah.
lot of people have.
Yeah.
And we sort of are starting on this line of questioning a second ago, which is probably why I thought of it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a
Um,
good way to thread it. Yeah. Is there?
but I
What
do,
is your opinion?
I think the answer is is sort of a yes and,
Yeah.
where it's like, I think that it is, and there's everyone says not everyone, but there's a lot of people who say that social media is kind of designed to be addictive.
Hmm.
And I not that I think everyone should just get off of it, but I do think that you have to be as mindful with your content as you are with the other
Mm,
things that you do in life.
hmm
Like with not it's not all things in moderation because I think there are some things that are not good even in moderation.
hmm
But there I think social media is one of those things that is like that where you have to
mm.
be in order for it to be healthy,
You need to be able to switch it off.
you have to use it in moderation. You had to be
Mm,
able to switch it off. And the other thing, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the line between fantasy and reality.
yeah.
And I think people are so often comparing their whole self to somebody's social media
Mm,
presentation.
hmm
It's clean now, but the room that I'm filming in right now, for the first 2 years of the show,
hmm
this was the clean corner.
mm,
The rest of the office had stuff piled up to my waist.
hmm hmm
It was horrific. It was awful. But
Why,
anybody looking at
why,
this,
why was it that way?
I have ADHD. There's a lot of things that
Okay.
led up to that. This my
Yeah.
office for a long time has kind of been the doom room where when we're cleaning up other things, stuff just gets piled in here. And I
Yeah.
finally made the conscious decision that I needed a workspace that was mine and that was clean. And
hmm
so I finally, just a couple months ago,
hmm
picked it up. Right.
Congratulations.
But anybody just looking, thank you. But anybody just looking at this corner thinks like, wow, she's got such a great aesthetic. Look at her little cute
Mm,
corner. Right.
Yeah,
And
real.
that's
Yeah.
not something that I haven't been vocal about either. Like I
Yeah.
think I've mentioned that either in a couple, I have mentioned that in a couple of episodes. Like,
hmm
oh, what people can't see is this room's a mess.
mm
But I think that's very important that,
mm
people show you what they want you to see,
mm
and that myself included, right?
Of
Like
course.
I'm not
Everyone.
going to film, like as an example, if my husband and I were having a fight, I'm not going to film that and put that on the internet.
Yeah.
I might take a piece of it and reenact it for the internet, but I'm
Turn it
not
into a
like,
skit. Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to turn it into a skit in a way that's digestible for people
Yeah.
and doesn't feel too intrusive to like the other people in my life as well, right? So like whenever
mm
I think that's just important to realize in terms of using social media healthfully is that you have to remember that this is even
mm
somebody who's authentic,
mm
it's a curated authenticity.
Yeah. I was trying to find the word, right? Curated is the word. Yeah. Yeah, I get you. Cool. Well, thank you very much, for taking the time and
Yeah,
answering the questions and being so genuine with your answers and your time. Um,
it's a couple of
there-
tangents there. I apologize.
Dude, no, like apart from the bathroom break, we're good. Even then, I'm cool with it too. No, but really, genuinely, I feel like there's a lot of things we missed, but I guess that's the nature of conversation, really. You can't chase every thread all the way back. Um, but there's definitely some stuff that I wanted to bring up, so I might kind of include that in like I didn't get to talk about this, but I really
Well, if
I
you can
would
think of anything else, I'm happy to
come back.
keep going. I don't know if you have any more thoughts, but
Yeah, no, that's okay.
yeah.
No, if I mean, I'll be more than happy, man, to do more, but maybe not directly on social media because there's a lot of other things
Yeah.
that you have, I think, going
Oh yeah,
on, and
there's so many things.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I
Outside
really
of
do think
your,
that
sorry,
the oh no good.
what do you really think?
Oh, I now that I brought it up, I was really thinking about that comparison thing, and it's so
Mm,
I think it's difficult because I think one of the challenges of social media and media in general is
hmm
you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So you're not sitting there imagining what all the stuff is that you don't see.
Mm,
You just see what you see and you make all of your assessments based on that. It
mm,
takes a lot of sort of existential awareness to step
mm,
out of like the moment of watching a video and thinking
mm,
about the person outside of the context of what you've just seen.
mm. or whatever else. If it's not a
Um,
person, but like a situation, you can go into global politics, and what you know about it is such a tiny fraction of what is the reality of any real situation, right? Everything has to be
yeah,
curated to be digestible.
we didn't even talk about AI, which is a
No.
whole other can of worms.
Yeah, that
And
is
I think
definitely going to be
that's
a future episode because I really want to get into that. Yeah.
the deep fakes people can do these days. And I mean, a lot of it's pretty obvious, but as soon as AI gets its figures out how to actually do human hands, and
Mm.
that it makes sense and it's not like three fingers or six fingers
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know
Human hands
whatever,
and
I think.
writing. Yeah. And language. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's I think that's part of why the things that I think about in terms of like health of using social
Mm.
media are so important, because
Mm.
as you know, the line between reality and fiction, not comparing yourself to the things that you see, because as AI grows, like those
Mm.
lines will get blurrier and blurrier. And if you're
Mm.
not hyper, I don't want to say hyper vigilant, but if you don't have any vigilance about protecting
Mm.
your mind from that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
then social media will, I think, go from being
Become
a
worse.
tool that can be useful to
Mm.
something that's just a hellscape.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like this concept that I really want to kind of explore more. And it's like mental slash like psychic immunity. Like we have a physical immunity that's been evolved over millions, millions of years, but we have a very, very poor psychic immunity because we're so dependent on, on a developmental level, we're so dependent on our parents to be our immunity, our mental immunity. And the way of learning mental immunity is so poor. School doesn't really do it, social media doesn't do it. I guess the principle of therapy is to try and learn like psychic immunity or emotional immunity so that you can listen to yourself and kind of learn to separate fiction from reality, because a lot of the problem with people is about themselves not being able to separate what is fiction from reality. Like they're conditioning from themselves, right? They're conditioning from their real feelings, their real values. And that whole process of like you say, being able to separate the two and then be able to bounce back what isn't good for you, I guess, what is pathogenic to you, that's essential. And I think you're right. It's going to be harder to do that if you can't tell the difference, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's sort of like when you think about mean comments, I think that those
Yeah.
are kind of a lot of the times the ones that sort of demonstrate people's lack of ability to do that.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think it can all that social media has the potential to stay a helpful tool for as long
Mm.
as we are cautious about it. But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, thank you
it's
for
not easy.
increasing caution, man. Yeah, it's not. Nothing is easy though. So it's good that at least there are reasonable and sort of intelligent people that can talk about it like you. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Not to say that you always have to be reasonable and intelligent. We can also be stupid and crazy, but fuck it.
Yep,
We're people, right?
we all are. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's I think
Exactly.
that's the one you were asking. I'll just end on this. You were
Yeah.
asking earlier, what's like the differences between who I am online and who I am in real life, and
Uh-huh.
I will on here. I will say this. So in my real life, I don't think I've ever said this on the show, but in my real life, my quote, the quote of Xannie is "People are dumb."
Yeah.
And I include myself in that. Like that's not
Yeah,
something
of
I just say
course.
about other people. Like
Yeah.
I include myself in that. But that's probably the one thing. Like I have them in my real life. I'm much more like, man, people are dumb.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of attitude about things.
I
Like
get you.
not
Yeah.
not in an angry way. Just like
Yeah.
you know, I have one of my best friends has been going through something, and she'll call me up and she'll be like, man, you know, like this interaction was horrible. Why are people like this? And I'm like, because people are dumb.
Yeah. It's
And
like,
then we laugh about it.
I'm gonna get, I mean, if this ever becomes big enough to get any form of audience, I'm gonna get the creationists on my ass. But we're dumb monkeys, man. We're just dumb monkeys trying to like pretend that we know what we're doing, you know? Like it's as simple as that. So you're gonna be stupid, you're gonna be blind, and you're only not gonna be blind when something big enough comes and shows you how wrong you are. And that'll only like lighten up that point of stupidity that you didn't previously realize, not the rest of it, you know, you're still gonna be blind and stupid to everything else. So, but I also think that it's like a generational process, right? Like we are just one individual in a much longer thread that is trying to get smarter. Globally speaking, that's kind of like the story of humanity is trying to get bigger and bigger brains to be less and less stupid, you know? But we're not done. We're not done yet, you know? So,
And all of the bigger brainedness sometimes comes at a cost. It's like
yeah.
just we don't often think, oh, just because I can do this, should I?
Should I?
That's
Is it?
another
Is it?
question. It's
Is it a
like,
great one?
is this a good idea?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like I discovered
Maybe,
how to do this. Maybe
yeah.
think about whether or not it's a good idea to actually do that.
Yeah, that makes me feel like it puts the seed of like, is this a good idea to do a podcast and go on social media and try to create a channel and all this? Hmm.
Oh, well, I
Maybe.
was thinking more like I'm trying to think of something like I don't know, like I'll give a really benign example, like mixing a
Mhm.
bunch of random chemicals in your kitchen just to see what happens. It's
Yeah,
like you can,
you can. Should you research it before you
but
do
like
it? Probably.
yeah,
Would you
probably
do it anyway? Maybe. Who knows? That's
depends on
the
what it
other
is.
side of
But
humanity.
yeah.
Trying to get smarter, but also kind of just trying to try stuff out, see what sticks.
Well, sometimes becoming too specialized in something you don't
Mm,
realize some
mm,
of the just common sense things that maybe fall by the wayside a little bit.
yeah, yeah. Common sense is going to be a great episode when I get there. I don't even know what the
Well, it's
questions would
funny
be.
because like it's a whole again a whole other can of worms, but it's
Yeah,
that's a discussion I get into even just with people in my life. It's like, oh, is that common sense? Is it not?
yeah,
Like
yeah. It's a good point. It's a good point. Who tells?
it's not as obvious as I think a lot of us would like to assume it is.
Yeah.
We're like, oh,
I
that's
mean,
common sense. Maybe.
it's kind of only common sense if you know better because you failed enough to make it common sense, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or you've learned, I guess, but that means someone else has failed enough to make it common sense. So, like I say, a generational process, right?
Yep.
Anyway, thank you so much for your time, Zanny. It's been a pleasure. I,
You're
I
so welcome.
I don't know if you want to plug yourself again. I mean, you talked about the BPD bunch, but I don't know if there's like and Xanabel like makes, but is there anything else that you'd
Yeah,
like?
so I mean, I'll just say you can find me on my personal account. Is the easiest way is just on Instagram at Xanabel, and then everywhere else I'm basically the BPD bunch. And you
Okay,
can if you just Google that, you will find us. We're the
cool.
only ones with
Well,
that name, so
whoever's listening, go and do that because Zanny's very cool, and I expect from what you've said, the BPD bunch is full of other equally cool people that have a lot to
it's
say. So
they're
yeah,
pretty cool. I think they're pretty
yeah,
great.
yeah, cool. All right then. Well, thank you very much, Zanny.
Thank you.
I'll catch you next time.